Mr. Maudling also faced difficult decisions. He had to damp down the growing risk of an inflationary boom, a boom sparked off by his own budget the previous year. But he also had to create the right economic mood for the Tories to win.
One takes chances. You can't fail to take chances. Whatever you do is bound to be a certain element of chance.
Mr. Maudling took one chance too many, his famous dash for growth, and the Tories lost the election, with him taking much of the blame and losing his subsequent bid to win the Tory leadership as well.
It is very dangerous, I think, to a politician's reputation to be held subsequently to have taken great risks with the budget. And I think Maudling suffered in that way. I think Maudling might have become leader of the Conservative Party instead of Heath, but for the fact that after the election it was discovered there was this enormous balance of payments deficit, and that Maudling had done nothing about it between his budget and the election.
6 years later, Roy Jenkins took no risks in his budget. He saw it as one of consolidation.
We don't want one of those short, artificial booms, leading inevitably to deficit and cutback, which we've seen only too often in the past, particularly in Tory election years.
But that 1970 budget was still followed by electoral defeat for Labour. And Ken Clarke might want to bear in mind that Mr. Jenkins did take risks with inflation. Prices were rising when Labour lost office, still for many, Mr. Clarke's potential Achilles heel. Mr. Clarke shares with Mr. Jenkins a vision of Britain's place in Europe, a vision which might, once the budget froth is forgotten, come to define Mr. Clarke's chancellorship. But he will not relish sharing with his Labour predecessor the stigma of defeat.
Well, so what does the press make of today's budget? In a moment I'll be talking to two of what used to be called Fleet Street's finest, but first a look at what tomorrow morning's papers say. The Daily Mirror courageously says that's why we gave it back, because it was so boring. That's his explanation for not running with the news of what was going to be in the budget this morning. Clarke shows caution on tax cuts. Is the Financial Times' front page. The Sun says Ken sits on the fence and describes it as a welcome move back towards the old Tory trick of good housekeeping, most definitely not a cynical vote-winning bribe. Going on to the Guardian, the Tories' last card is their description of it, a politically shrewd but economically dubious attempt to play Scrooge and Santa Claus at the same time. Not nearly enough here to make Middle Britain roar or send it galumphing back into the Tory camp. Whichever party wins the election, the Chancellor will have left an awkward legacy. The independent grammar test for teachers is their lead. Clarke's 1p cheers Tories in the Times. The Express, steady as she grows. The Daily Star, Jacko's bride wants a divorce. They describe it as Peneth Clarke. And Whiskey Ken's last orders in the Daily Mail, a penny for your votes in the Morning Star, and Clarke's penny from heaven in the Telegraph. I think I misattributed one of the leaders there. It was a little difficult to see. Right, we're joined now by Samuel Brittan of the Financial Times and Will Hutton, editor of the Observer. What's your verdict on the budget, Samuel Brittan?
It's actually quite a tight budget that increases the tax burden and reduces borrowing in future years. Nobody said it, but it's in the Chancellor's Red Book if you look at it.
Increases borrowing?
No, decreases borrowing, reduces borrowing, and increases the tax burden. The tax as a proportion of the national income goes up next year and the year after. It's about somewhere like page 80 in the Chancellor's own Red Book.
Gosh, I slipped my notice there, I'm afraid, on page 80. But Labour are basically right, then, in saying the tax burden goes up.
Yeah. Yes, yeah, but it's very peculiar for that party to be complaining about it. Most of my Labour friends shout at me at dinner tables for not wanting to increase taxes more.
What is your version?
Well, first of all, there's the budget as it should have been, and the budget as it should have been, if there wasn't an election, it should have been about raising taxes, and it should have been about having realistic public expenditure projections for the out years, and you've already commented that on the programme. But if you look at the budget as it was, given he's 20 points behind in the polls, it's a tight budget. If you add in the council tax, which will go up over the next 3 years, he is lifting the tax burden. In fact, next year, taxes will go up slightly as a proportion of GDP. This is actually, I think, the right way in which to move the economy. And he's disguised that with this 1 penny off the standard rate. You've got council tax going up, you've got insurance tax, you've got the airport tax, you've got excise duties on cigarettes. It's all together, and you've got the withdrawal of the relief on profit-related pay. And cumulatively, that adds up to quite a large sum of money.
When he talked about it as being a virtuous budget, I mean, I don't quite know what he meant by that, but I mean, did it strike you as particularly virtuous?
Well, it is virtuous in that he followed the misguided advice of many financial commentators who wanted him to raise the tax burden. They're stuck in the era of Stafford Cripps, and they all want the tax burden to increase, and it's a good Labour budget in some ways.
No, we're not stuck in the era of Stafford Cripps, Samuel.
Your pals get into power, they'll certainly raise the tax burden.
I mean, the point is that the economy is motoring away with consumption rising very strongly. The Bank of England is having to pressurise the Chancellor into raising interest rates by actually being relatively prudent. I mean, I think that he could have been more prudent still, and it's remarkable, given the political pressure on him, that he's been as prudent as he has, and he's done the right thing.
Well, of course the Bank of England wants to raise interest rates because that is the right weapon for combating inflation. We've had 30 or 40 years of experience that short-term adjustments in fiscal policy, in the balance of the budget, do not make much difference to the rate of inflation. Monetary policy, which most people don't understand until it hits the value of their house, makes an enormous difference to the rate of inflation.
Well, just looking at what those predictions are for government spending, would either of you fancy being the next Chancellor of the Exchequer after the election? He's not going to inherit a very easy state of affairs, is he?
No. I mean, the public expenditure targets for the immediate financial year, 97-98, probably are achievable. But it's the years after that where it gets, frankly, incredible. The spending in the health service and education, universities is already incredibly pinched. There's big cuts, by the way, coming in, which you didn't mention earlier in the programme, in the Scottish budget and the Welsh budget. Both there's, for Scottish and Welsh viewers, there's actually very substantial cuts ahead. The training budget's been emasculated, the housing budget's in trouble.
What are you laughing about?
I'm laughing at the way in which my colleague on the left, faced with an increasing tax burden, public spending well over 40% of the national income, thinks it's grossly inadequate. Well, it's nice to have old Labour represented. It's better than the equivocations we get.
Just in general terms, I mean, historically, do budgets win elections? I mean, is there anything to...
No, but I think the whole attitude of budgets is ridiculous. The public want more services, they've got to pay for them, and I'm not standing for election, and I can say so. They want, and somehow they think that budget is a sort of betting bonanza. And you hear so-called ordinary people saying, oh, the budget didn't do very much for me, as if that is the idea of a budget. The budget is takes, doesn't give. Every budget does that. I think the Chancellors are at fault in not giving Edmund Dell-like sermons on what the whole thing is about, and encouraging people to with the idea that economic growth comes from governments. It doesn't. Governments take, they don't give.
Will Hutton.
Well, I think that taxation is comparatively low in Britain compared with other European countries.
Yes.
I think that British people, the British public, do want to improve public services, and I think that that taxes will have to go up a bit to pay for them. That doesn't necessarily mean on ordinary men and women. I think the scope for increasing taxes...
All squeeze the rich.
Oh, okay, okay.
So squeeze the corporate sector, Samuel.
We've got two such distinguished journalists here. Let me ask you, had you been the editor of the Daily Mirror yesterday, and you'd got the whole of the budget, or more or less the whole of the budget, would you have published?
I'm going to say something extremely arrogant. I would have known, being a bit of a specialist, I would have known that that would have been a 48 hours wonder, and it could not have done any harm to the country. But supposing
you would have printed.
Yes, but supposing it were a subject I didn't know too much about, like defence or military matters, I would have, although I generally like to publish and be damned, I would be hesitant to do my country damage over a 24-hour lead over other papers. But
you would have printed.
I would have printed.
Would you have printed?
Yes, I would have printed. I've got the information into the public domain one way or another. I've been in economic journalism for 18 years, searching after budget leaks, and here was the great one, and not to have published it was just a dereliction.
OK, thank you both very much. Thanks. That's all from this budget special edition of Newsnight tonight. I'll be back with more tomorrow night. Until then, from all of us on the programme, good night.
And later tonight, Vincent Hanna presents 2 hours of live debate dissecting the budget, an after-hours special